Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something incredibly powerful, something that's going to totally shift your perspective on exactly why you're at university. We are looking at the true impact of your academic writing on society and the nation. If you've ever felt like your assignments are, just a chore to get through, I want you to erase that thought right now. As a student, you aren't just soaking up information. You are actually taking on a massive, vital civic duty for our national development. The words you're putting down on paper carry incredible weight, and today we're going to see exactly why.
So, let me start off by asking you a really direct question. Does your essay just die on your lecturer's desk? It's a super common perception, right? You write the paper, hit submit, get your grade, and, well, that's the end of the whole shebang. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Your essay is actually the very beginning of what we call the journey of an idea. It's not just a box to check for a grade, it's literally a spark.
Which brings us to our first section, beyond the lecture hall, looking at the chain of influence. Because what really happens when we take that idea out into the real world? Well, an idea on paper is actually like a seed that kicks off a pretty powerful chain reaction. When you put together a well-researched essay or thesis, that single piece of writing has the potential to be picked up and referenced by policymakers. It gets amplified by the mass media and championed by civil society organizations. It's that systematic, evidence-based knowledge that eventually shifts how society understands really crucial issues like identity, social justice, and national progress.
And this is where you come in. You are what we call a civic actor. Now, as a future scholar, striving for absolute neutrality can sometimes detach you from social reality. What you actually need is intellectual courage. Society expects you to produce critical, ethical knowledge that champions the interests of the nation. Your writing isn't just neutral air. It carries deep values. Think about how historical writing literally dictates how future generations remember the past. You have this incredible power to shape social realities and build the dominant narratives of tomorrow.
Moving right along to our next section, Myths of Academic Writing, where we'll be debunking the misconceptions. Before you can fully embrace this civic role we're talking about, we need to break down some of the false beliefs that might be holding you back from realizing your true potential.
Let's look at the first myth, this idea that academic writing has zero social impact just because you don't see results immediately. Look, academic impact is rarely a physical, overnight thing. It's cumulative. The reality here is long-term structural change. Think about the really massive social movements in history. They didn't start with a protest in the streets. They started as an idea on paper in some scholarly journal. It fundamentally changes how we see the world long before it ever turns into physical action.
Okay, the second myth is that academic language just makes knowledge elitist and totally irrelevant. But here is the reality. Strict technical language is actually a critical tool for precision and testability. It's not some wall built to keep the public out. The real problem isn't the complex language itself. The failure actually happens when scholars fail to translate those precise findings into the public sphere. When we forget to write for the public, well, that's exactly when that elitist perception takes root.
And finally, the third myth. Are citations really the only measure of your impact? Absolutely not. I mean, yes, of course, metrics matter for your academic reputation, but obsessing over them completely misses the big picture. The real reality is civic contribution. True intellectual influence is measured by how your work elevates societal awareness, how it builds civic consciousness, and how it actually improves the quality of public debate.
That leads us right to Section 3, Bridging Knowledge and Society, specifically looking at translating knowledge. If the ultimate goal is civic contribution, how do we actually get there? Let's break down how academic work successfully enters and elevates the public space.
Think of this as your personal pipeline of influence. It starts with building a social vocabulary. Believe it or not, everyday terms that we use all the time to describe our world, phrases like structural inequality, colonial heritage, or sustainable development, those were actually born from academic writing. From there, you provide analytical frameworks so society can think systematically and logically, rather than just purely emotionally. And finally, argument clarity. Without your clarity, the public space just gets filled up with shallow populism. Your clarity is what ensures the high quality of our societal conversation.
But I have to give you a massive warning right here. Translating your work for the public does not mean oversimplifying it. Oversimplification strips away all that crucial historical and structural context, which leads the public to view massive, complex systemic problems as just, individual issues. You have to keep the nuances. Now, in today's super fast-paced social media era, there's a huge pressure to just create sensational, bite-sized narratives. You've got to resist that pressure.
Ethical translation is what builds a critically thinking society, valuing popularity over scientific accuracy that only erodes public trust in academia.
Which brings us to Section 4, Shaping Policy and Debate. We're talking about injecting evidence into public life. Let's look at how all of this responsible translation directly shapes the real world, specifically when it comes to law, education, and national policy. Your academic infrastructure acts as this incredible, vital safeguard, because before a policymaker can even try to solve a problem, you have to define it for them. Your writing provides that exact definition. Then you analyze the long-term risks, spotting all those hidden blind spots in potential policies. And this does something incredibly important. It literally prevents politicians from making short-sighted, reactive decisions that are just based on temporary political pressure. Ultimately, when a policy is backed by your clear, scientific analysis, you are creating real accountability and transparency for the public.
In this way, you basically become the architect of debate. Let's be real. So much of public debate right now is pretty shallow and just driven by mere speculation. But by supplying historical context, theoretical frameworks, and solid empirical data, you transform that speculation into mature, factual dialogue. You calm the tensions. You shift the conversation from just guessing to actual fact-based evaluation. You are the ones setting the ethical standards for a healthy democracy.
And that takes us to our final section, Civic Responsibility of Academic Writers, focusing on the ethics of representation. Because you hold so much power as an architect of debate, we really have to discuss the heavy moral and intellectual responsibility that comes with being a civic actor.
When you're representing an opposing argument, the biggest unethical trap is the straw man fallacy. That's when you twist or weaken someone's view just so you can easily defeat it. Don't do that. Instead, you've got to use the principle of charity. You need to present opposing views fairly and at their absolute best. Your critique is only really meaningful if it addresses the actual argument. Furthermore, maintaining factual integrity means zero data manipulation, and deeply understanding context prevents dangerous, narrow generalizations. Intellectual honesty, it's absolutely non-negotiable.
And that brings up a really huge question for us. How do we handle people who completely disagree with us? The answer is not as personal threats, but as an essential dynamic. Think about it. Without differing viewpoints, knowledge just becomes dogmatic, static, and totally closed-minded. Intellectual maturity actually begins when we celebrate a diversity of ideas as a hard prerequisite for societal growth. We absolutely must maintain courtesy in our disagreements. I want you to really absorb this next point. Ensuring factual accuracy is not trivial. It is your moral responsibility to society. This kind of brings the whole journey of the idea full circle. A factual error doesn't just hurt your specific argument. It actively misleads readers and damages public discourse. The words you choose, the data you verify, treating opposing views with respect, this carries a very heavy moral weight. You aren't just writing for a grade anymore. Society is literally using your work as a reference point.
So as you sit down to write your very next academic assignment, I want to leave you with this one question. What narrative will you build today? Are you going to write something that merely passes the class? Or will you embrace your role as a civic actor and draft the ideas that are going to shape the future of our nation? The pen is in your hand, and the impact is entirely up to you. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.